Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to the people like you. With us today on the program, we got to talk to Tom Wakely. He is a congressional candidate in Texas's 21st district. He is running on the Green Party line. We got to have a wonderful conversation with him around his, faith as a former, reverend, and he got to tell us about, how we need to be addressing the existential crises of our time, primarily in climate change, and how we need to be putting a universal basic income into people's hands to address economic inequality. And then we finally got to have a conversation about, how do we address this kind of duopoly in our country between Democrats and Republicans. Obviously, he is running as a Green Party candidate, but he actually used to be the former Democratic Party nominee in 2016. So it was really interesting getting to hear him talk about, why he went from one party to another. So with today being election day, we wanted to talk to him to really hear the case out of, balancing between voting Democrat and Green Party. He has recommended that, you look down ballot when you're looking for the Greens and vote your conscience at the top of the ticket. We here are advocating for people to be able to vote for Joe Biden, as well as, again, looking down ballot case by case of who the best candidates are and knowing if your district can allow you to try and break the duopoly already. So I had a great time being able to talk with Tom. I know you're going to enjoy it as well. So with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, we're here with Reverend Tom Wakely, a congressional candidate in Texas's 21st district, running on the Green Party line. Tom, welcome to the program.
I appreciate it, John. I really do. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. So, Tom, before we get into the entirety of what your campaign really stands for, I think it would be great to kind of get some perspective of what you do, beyond politics. You are a reverend and, you are a Unitarian Universalist. I think I've seen a lot of commonalities with Unitarian Universalism and what we try and preach here as Democratic Universalism. Could you let for the folks out there know a little bit about what Unitarian Universalism is?
Well, frankly, right now, I'm not affiliated with the Unitarians anymore, even though I was a Unitarian pastor. I think it's just I'm a secular humanist. And I think that pretty much sums up who I am, and it fits more in with the Unitarians. But I went to a United Church of Christ seminary. But I started a Unitarian church. And then I subsequently hung out with the Lutherans. So I've been kind of, a traveler in terms of the faith community, but always a secular humanist.
So I'd love to ask you, obviously you espouse secular humanism, but I think faith is a very interesting conversation in how it relates to, the political process. Some people will say, like progressives, like most Green Party members are, they don't know how to actually talk to these faith-based communities. Do you think it's important to talk about faith within our political discussions in general?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. No, it's very, very important. They are the leaders, from Martin Luther King on to before King. The faith community has always been out there. They're in the forefront of this. And that's one reason I went to seminary, is to kind of better understand where the Christian movement was coming from. So even though I say I'm a secular humanist, I mean that's not really true as much as I'm just a traveler. I mean, I find stuff within Christianity, within the Jewish faith. I have a lot of Muslim friends, so I think it's just more of an interfaith man who believes that whether it's God you believe in or the Great Spirit, faith is an extremely important part of everything we do every single day. And I think all of us need to really start reaching out to that faith community because they are our allies.
Yeah, no, I certainly think a lot of people who will actually read the text and see some of the stuff in it would see that there are some of these common values of progressivism within it. And I do agree that, there are going to be bits of pieces of faith of different religions that all have, things that we can agree to, some common truths to it. And so I can understand that perspective of having a variety of opinions there. It kind of gives a independent perspective kind of in politics as well. What would you say is that like core few issues that you're trying to work through within the campaign that really inspired you to run for office? I know this isn't your first time, but what are those core whys for you want to getting involved in political office?
I think it's really just, I mean, everything intersects with one another, intersectionality. But the primary motivating factor for me was climate change. And that goes back to a faith-based perspective. I think all the major faiths, God created the earth. We're here to protect the earth. Native Americans are so much tied into that. And I think that's what kind of motivated me into getting involved, is that we need to do something about climate change. And it's just not happening.
So I'd love to pry a little bit on the climate change point. What are some of those transition plans that you're looking to do? I obviously think there's a lot of different solutions to this because it's a big problem. So there's a lot of options. What are some of the things you'd prioritize to address climate change?
Well, I think the major thing we need to look at is that we're pumping way too much greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and the planet's heating up. And 4 years ago, when I first jumped into running for Congress in Texas 21, climate change was my main focus. And I ran against Lamar Smith. I don't know if you recall that guy. He was 30 some odd year Republican, chair of the House Committee on Science, Space, Technology, and I guess he had the nickname as the commander in chief of anti-climate change. He was. Yeah. So we ran against him on the issue of climate change. And what I pointed out to everybody, unless we did something, this was 4 years ago, unless we did something now, it was only going to get worse. Well, 2 years later, in 2018, I jumped into the Democratic primary for governor to take my message around the state. We got to do something about it. It's no longer climate change, it's now a climate crisis. And this was 2018. And I warned people that if we don't do something now, it's going to get worse. And now it's 2 years later again. And it's no longer a climate crisis, it's a climate emergency. And if people don't pay attention this time, in 2 years, it's going to be a climate catastrophe. And 2 years after that, it's going to be a climate apocalypse. Seriously, it has gotten so bad. I don't know if you know this. We have literally millions and millions of abandoned or orphaned oil and gas wells here in the United States. Some of them dating back to the 1930s. And they're just pumping, well, they're not pumping, they're leaking methane gas into the atmosphere since the 30s. And we need to plug them all. But I don't see that. We need to stop fracking. But I think it's not going to happen. It should happen, but it's not going to happen. The hurdles, whether Trump gets reelected or Biden gets elected, it doesn't matter. They both support fracking. So that's going to be an uphill battle to do anything about fracking. But we could do something about plugging those 2.5 million abandoned wells in the United States. But again, politics. The last figure I saw, it's going to cost us $600 billion. $600 billion to plug all of those wells. But it needs to be done. I mean, it just needs to be done. And I think we need to probably set something up like we did with the Superfund sites for chemical exposure, contaminant. We need to set something similar up to plug all these abandoned wells. Fund it, and let's start plugging all those wells. And that'll keep tens of thousands of people busy for many, many years to going out there and plugging 2 million wells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I hear a couple things here. I think first and foremost, what I'm hearing is that we have to address just the main problem of fossil fuels coming out of the system, and we got to do it sooner than later. But, I want to know, what is that transition plan? Because, I agree that fracking is bad. But I think one of the things that Joe Biden's trying to do in his approach is that he's saying, we're going to freeze any new developments, but we're not going to phase that out until we start grappling with oil and coal. I know that oil, as well as fossil fuels like, natural gas, are big economies in Texas. Could you help people understand what that transition plan is? Because, of course it's going to be necessary, but that's going to take, radical mobilization to actually accomplish. What does that plan look like for the workers who are going to have to leave these jobs in the fossil fuel industry?
Yeah, and I think under Biden's plan, I think he only said no new fracking on federal lands. That's what his position is. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop fracking anywhere else on private lands or with oil companies or gas companies. It's just no new fracking on federal lands. So I think the
just to clarify, that point is that in general you can't have fracking on public lands, but the expansion of private fracking enterprises is also frozen. It's just not removing existing fracking implementation that's already trying to get natural gas. I just want to clarify that position.
Okay. So, but anyway, in terms of transition, I think it's not going to be easy, but I think we need to look at, I'm sure these are the same arguments people gave that were making buggy whips and wheels for horse-drawn carriages. We're going to be out of the job. What are we going to do? But we transitioned to the automobile anyway. So I think people need to understand that, yeah, we need to transition out of fossil fuels. You're going to be out of a job. But like I said, everything is intersectional. So maybe that's where universal basic income comes in. All right, guys, you're out of work. We're going to shut down fossil fuels. You're not going to have a job, but we can provide you with enough income until we can find you another job. But I mean, there's all sorts of avenues we can take. But I am afraid, John, that we're going to be we've already crossed the Rubicon.
Yeah.
From every climate scientist I've talked to, they said even if we stop all the fracking in January, stopped it completely throughout the United States, we capped all of those abandoned wells, all we would do is just stop where we're at now. Things aren't going to get better. We're still going to have intensified, third hurricane this season just hit New Orleans. We're going to have intense storms. We still have water. Things are just going to stop. It's not going to get better. But if we don't stop it, like next year, in 2 years, it's going to be a catastrophe. So I think we have, and all of this waiting until 2030, 2050 to transition out of fossil fuels is way too long to wait. It's going to have to be a lot quicker. I mean, a whole lot quicker. Like within the next decade, we're going to have to completely move away. And I think that's where, wind power, more solar power. I mean, we have a lot of technology. So, I mean, it's just a matter of the willingness to do that. And that's the question is, do we have the willpower to do it? And there's so much money involved in oil and gas, so much money pouring into political candidates, that I just can't see people wanting to give that up. But we have to think beyond ourselves. And I think the Native American community says when they make a decision, they look out at 7 generations. What decisions do we make are going to affect 7 generations down the road? We don't have that. We kind of think, well, how's it going to affect me next week, let alone my grandchildren, my great-great-great-great-grandchildren. So I think it's probably, and like I said, I think it's going to be forced upon us. I don't think we're going to have a choice. I think the sea levels are going to be rising. New Orleans, like I said, has been hit. Next year is going to get hit again and again and again. As the polar ice caps melt, glaciers melt, sea level, we're going to lose coastal cities. It's going to be forced upon us to transition away from fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I think part of that incentive is the terms that these people in Congress have. When you have a 2-year election cycle and you're constantly running for reelection, you're not thinking towards the future. You're thinking in these 2-year blocks, if that, even these weeks at a time, as you said before. So I think there's some natural incentives for why, they're not thinking of this, in addition to the monetary factors that the fossil fuel companies pump in. I think this is my final question for this first part is, I wanted to understand in your mind, what is that democracy reform plan that you think needs to be done so that the incentives change in Congress so that they want to finally take action on issues like climate change? Because I think, as you said, we got to do it quickly, but it seems like they just are dragging their feet along. What's your plan?
I was just talking today. I don't know if you know, my wife and I run a hospice from our home. So one of the nurses, Beverly, was here today. And so she's finished up with a patient. And we're talking about this same thing. And she mentioned, we've got people in Congress 87 years old that have been there forever and a day. We got octogenarians everywhere in Congress. And that is part of the problem, is that I'm an old guy too, but and I know I'm dealing with old people all the time, and there's absolutely no way I can tell you an 87-year-old person is able. No, we have a major problem with that, and I think there needs to be term limits. That's one way to deal with this age issue. Maybe for the House, maybe no more. Change the term. Maybe instead of every 2 years, one term, 6 years. That's it. One term, 6 years. You get in, you got 6 years, then you're off back to your day job, whatever it was. Maybe for senators, maybe up to 10 years. One term, that's it. And if we can do something like that, you can get in there, you can work your 6 years as a congressperson, 10 years as a senator, but then you return back into your day job. Because otherwise, I just don't see it. I don't see how it was going to change. I mean, you're younger than me. I guess you look younger. You got your hair.
Yes, I'm very secretly old.
But the thing is that you've got to agree, man. This is just ridiculous to have 87-year-old people in there making decisions for your generation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, hey, the Speaker of the House currently, Nancy Pelosi, is around 81. She is now contemplating running again and being the leader of the party again. So, and then you have now our oldest president ever. Doesn't matter who wins this election cycle, barring a third party finally breaking through. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We have this age, restriction. And I think fundamentally it comes down to, in my opinion, and we'll touch on this in the second part, there's a little bit of a distribution of wealth problem too. Older generations tend to have the wealth, and that's how the politicians need to win. So they start appealing to those crowds, and they have more connections over time. So, in our second part, we're going to talk about some economics before we go and, address the elephant in the room, which is, some people feel like they're trapped in this duopoly and should be supporting Democrats and Republicans. You were the former nominee of the Democratic Party. Why should they be going green? So we'll address all those things in our second part of our conversation. So join us real soon. We'll be back with Tom Wakely.
All right, thanks.
Okay, we're back with Tom Wakely, a candidate for Congress in Texas's 21st district. So, Tom, we left off our conversation talking about democracy reform and how we try and change the incentives of the system, so that we can address this big problem of climate change. I was talking about in that end of the first part about how I also think that wealth is a driving factor. You mentioned this gerontocracy we got to address, but that's also where the money lies. How do you think we can be improving on the economic conditions in society? We have record level economic inequality. What are some of the things that you are looking to do to try and address that issue?
It's amazing too. Again, in the 21st Congressional District now, there is an obscene amount of money that's being spent in this congressional race by both the Republican and the Democrat. It's been the same way across congressional districts all over the country. Literally, they've got so much money they don't know what to do with it. My wife sometimes, once after the afternoon, she plays these video games on the computer. After she gets through each video game, an ad pops up for one of the candidates for the 21st Congressional District. They're on her video games. They're everywhere. They got so much money. But anyway, money is the driving force, and I think you are an exception. That media determines your credibility by how much money you raise. If you don't raise $1 million, you're not credible. We don't talk to you. And the issues are completely ignored. Again, going back to this current political race, these thousands of television commercials, the ads on Pandora, not one of them talks about issues. It's just simple. I am better than you. The other guy says, I'm better than you. They don't talk about the issues that are important to all of us. Healthcare, climate. Again, I'm not watching this stuff 24 hours a day, but I haven't heard one thing about climate change. None so ever, And I think there's got to be serious campaign finance reform. But again, I don't see that coming out of, I can't see Congress doing something about that themselves. It's like the fox in the hen house. I mean, they're not going to, why would I cut off the goose that laid the golden egg here, And so I don't know what's going to take. I really don't, to change the amount of money that's driving our elections. And I think that's one reason why so many people don't vote. They're tired of, again, you're a young guy, and I have to ask the question to you. Why do people think millionaires and billionaires are going to have your back? That they're going to save this country? But we keep electing millionaires. I just don't understand the rationale of, electing millionaires versus maybe a nurse or,
actual working class people. And I mean, your point is valid. The median net wealth of someone who's in Congress today is 1.1 million. So you're right. The average, or not the average person, but 50% of people in Congress, probably a little bit more, are millionaires or even wealthier. The wealthiest Democrat in the party happens to be the leader of the party. Nancy Pelosi is that wealthiest Democrat. So we take these factors into account. Yeah, money, of course, equals power. And I think, as you mentioned in the first part, with ideas like universal basic income, it's going to help us redistribute that money right back to people so that they have power. I think one of my questions for you is, you used to be the former Democratic nominee. Back in 2016, you were able to win the party's nomination and run in this district. Obviously you've made a transition and you're now running with the Green Party. As you said before, you also ran for governor. What led that political progression to the point where you felt like you wanted to run on the third party line?
Well, again, climate change always has been something that I've been very concerned about for years and years and years. And it finally got to that point where I needed to do something about it. And I'm an independent. And I ran in 2016 in the Democrat simply because I had ballot access. That was basically it. I paid $3,500, which my wife still complains about, but I paid $3,500 to get on the ballot, and I ran on climate change. And but the Democratic Party did not want to hear about climate change in 2016. They just didn't want to hear about it at all here in Texas. Again, I can't speak for other states that they were talking about. They didn't want to hear about it at all, especially wanting to ban fracking in the state. And the same thing in 2018 when I'm traveling around the state talking about banning fracking, and I'm up at the Permian Basin, home of fracking, telling the Democrats, man, we got to shut down these wells. That didn't go over too well. So the fact that the party just wasn't paying attention to climate change, the climate crisis, the climate emergency now, I just needed to find a place that people would actually listen to me. And that's how I went from one to the other to the Green Party.
So may I pry, who from like the Democratic Party was trying to tell you not to run on climate change? And did they give any particular reasons? Was it that they didn't believe in the climate change, or that it was an unpopular political decision? What was that conversation like where you found out that they didn't want to support that?
The head of the party here in Texas, Gilberto Hinojosa, he told me clearly in 16, 18, we are not going to run on climate change in Texas. Their whole strategy here in Texas is they're not interested in trying to bring new people into the party. They're not interested in trying to get progressives. The strategy to win is to attract Republicans. I mean, that's their whole strategy. Disinfect it, let's bring the Republicans over. And so they have to talk about things like not climate change. Let's not talk about Medicare for all. Let's not talk about, because that's going to turn off Republican voters, and that's how we win. And they haven't won an election in, a very, very long time here in Texas.
So I'd love to ask you a little bit about your opponents then in the Democratic Party. Wendy Davis is the Democrat running in this election cycle. Could you tell me a little bit more about why you think your platform is superior? Because I think some people are going to grapple with this is a close district. This is a purple district. 2018, it went 50% to the Republicans, around 47% to the Democrats. So I think they want to know, why should they not be going with Wendy? What, in your opinion, makes yourself?
Well, like I said, I know the district very well. The district lines have changed over the years, but I grew up in this district. I was born in the district. I grew up in the district. I know the district very well. Been living here for 67 years now. I'm in and out because I was in the military and all that, but I know the district very well. Wendy's lived in the district maybe 4 years, 5 years now. She doesn't know anything about the district or the people. Chip Roy, the incumbent, same thing. I don't think he even lives in the district. I think he lives just outside the district. But anyway, and what people want to say, both Wendy Davis and Chip Roy are fossil fuel candidates. Like I said, I ran against Lamar Smith in 2016, and I didn't have a dime to my name, and we still got 36% of the voters, something like that. And Lamar spent $1.5 million. Well, he must have seen the writing on the wall. Here's this Democratic socialist with hardly any money, and he got the most. I got more votes than anybody in the state of Texas that year, 2016, running for Congress on climate change. I think he saw the writing on the wall, so he stepped down, and he didn't run in 2018. Joseph Kopster, who is a former Republican, he ran in the Democratic primary. He won the Democratic primary, and it was an open seat. And that's when Chip Roy jumped in, the Republican. And so they ran against each other. And Chip did, Joseph was able to, he spent a lot of time in the Republican areas going after Republican voters. And that's why he was able to get more votes than I did, more votes than anyone else, because he was able to attract those Republican voters. And Wendy Davis is doing exactly the same thing. She's a former Republican turned Democrat. She's going after Republican voters. But I think people need to understand that, they're both fossil fuel candidates. I don't know if you know this. Wendy Davis, you know who Rick Perry is, right?
I do know who Rick Perry is, yes.
Right. Well, Wendy Davis's former law partner was Rick Perry's former chief of staff.
Okay.
So you can't tell me, even though it was a number of years ago, 10, 12 years ago, they were law partners together in the law firm. You can't tell me that relationship is not still there. her last job was, I think it was Chandler Hanley law firm, a big law firm. They've been representing oil and gas companies in Texas since the 1930s. She represented oil and gas companies. So, I mean, so her ties are not financial, they're relationship ties. And that's when people say, oh, she's not a falsified candidate. Look at her FEC report. She doesn't have any money. No, she doesn't take money from them. She has relationship ties. And to me, that's far more serious than taking a couple $1,000 from a oil company here, or a couple thousand from there. It's those long-term relationships that people need to be concerned about. So I think, go ahead.
So I guess I just wanted to kind of follow up. I think there are certain people who, let's say they know you in the district, but they feel like this is, a situation where, we have a now better funded candidate than the Republican right now. They have double the money. And this Texas is a, swing state in this whole general election. Do you feel like there should be people who are Democrats who maybe will vote for Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, but then should vote for yourself? Do you feel comfortable with that, or are you advocating if they want to vote for you, they should vote the whole ticket green?
No, if they got to make that decision themselves. They think Biden's the way to go for Biden. But then on down ballot, look at the alternative candidates. Look at the policy positions. Where do they sit in terms of where your values? I mean, where are they in terms of healthcare? I mean, the district is about almost 38% Latino. My wife's from Mexico, and she's got cousins throughout the district, all over the state. I mean, she's got cousins dying of COVID. Her sister, her husband, her two kids have all got the virus now. And like most of them on her family and most Latinos, they're lower income. They either don't have insurance, or if they do have insurance, it's not very good insurance. They got high deductibles, they got co-pays, out of network costs. And so, I mean, Wendy Davis is not paying attention to the Latinos in the district at all. But anyway, to go back to your question, I think that, the difference between Wendy Davis and Chip Roy are minuscule. I mean, there's some like women's reproductive rights. They're far apart. But they both support fracking. They both don't support the Green New Deal. They both don't support Medicare for all. They both don't support universal basic income. Neither one supports legalizing marijuana. Neither one, for immigrants that are in our military, Wendy Davis thinks they shouldn't be deported if you served in our military. I think if you're an immigrant serving in the military, you should be granted citizenship. You're serving in our military, you're getting shot at, So, I mean, there's more, those two have more in common than they do with me, for certainly. But I think for people, I'm telling them, look, it's not going to, we've got two progressive Democratic candidates, just right, their districts are right next to 21. Siegel is one of them, and he's running, and he supports the Green New Deal, and he wants to ban fracking. Well, if he gets elected and Wendy Davis gets elected, they're going to cancel each other's vote out, because he's going to be voting for the Green New Deal. She's going to vote against it. He wants to legalize marijuana. She doesn't. So what the heck? You've got two Democrats, but their votes are going to cancel each other out. So what I've been making the argument, if you really want a Green New Deal, if you really think we should ban fracking, then vote for us, because Wendy is going to cancel out any other progressive out there. I don't know does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that certainly answers my question. It's basically a very policy-oriented answer. I think the final question that I'd like to ask before we, obviously this is coming out on Election Day, so I want to give you the final pitch to the audience. to get them familiar with where Texas's 21st district is and how they can help out if they enjoyed hearing you. But I wanted to just know, what support has the Green Party in general been able to give you? Because I think there's been a lot of these movements for third parties from a lot of progressives. There was recently a convention for a movement for a People's Party. What has the Green Party been doing to be able to support down ballot candidates like yourself?
I mean, I think they're doing as much as they can with the limited resources that they have, which are very, very limited. And I don't think they have any hired staff anywhere. Everything's volunteer. So they have done as much promoting stuff as much. They have just like the Democrats have a congressional campaign committee, and they send out millions of dollars to candidates. The Green Party has a campaign congressional committee, and I got a $300 check for them. Thank you. So, but I think
it's a little bit different, yeah.
It's a little bit different, but I think they're doing as much as they can with the limited resources they have, and they've got a bad reputation among many people. For some of it, maybe it's probably legitimate, but there's also the same things that they complain about the Green Party. You can say the same about the Republican Party. You can say the same thing about the Democratic Party. And they're still, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, they're still a young party. I think in Texas, they first got on the ballot in 2000, then they lost ballot access, then they got ballot access again, then off again. And I was kicked off the ballot, right? Yeah. So, that's, what can I say? Wendy Davis must have seen us as a threat, that she was able to get the Texas Third Court of Appeals to issue a temporary restraining order against the Texas Secretary of State to keep me off the ballot. And I was off for about 3 weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks. And by the time the Texas Supreme Court put me back on the ballot, I had already closed out all my bank accounts. I shut down my campaign with the Federal Election Commission. Wow. I shut down everything. I was off the ballot. So now I had to gear back up. So we were out of the whole thing for a good month. So we jumped back into the race, probably full speed again in the middle of September. So it hurt us a lot for 30 days being out of no longer campaigning. So.
Yeah, no, I can certainly understand that. So,
but I think people just need to understand. Look, vote for Biden if you want, But I think down ballot, you need to look at, especially in this district. Look where I am. I'm not. I've been talking about universal health care, since the 80s. This is nothing new. I'm talking about the same things I've been talking about for 30, 40 years.
It's just a shame it hasn't happened in that whole time span.
It is.
Right?
Really,
yeah.
It's like Bernie Sanders. The same thing. That's what I think people like about him. They like about me. I'm saying the same thing. I'm not trying to earn your vote by telling you what you want to hear. This is what I think needs to happen. This is how I stood. So people need to recognize that. Look, we're not going to have really any change in this country until you start voting policy over party. That's the only way we're going to have any, substantive change. Voting policy over party. And I tell the faith community too, you need to vote faith over party. If your faith tells you something, if you're Catholic and you look at Catholic social teaching, look at the candidates. Where do they fit in with Catholic social teaching? Look at me. I was the parish social minister at a Catholic church for many, many years, even though I'm not Catholic. Look at those type policy over party, faith over party. And then we can start making some headway. But this blind loyalty to a democratic institution, I'll give you another perfect example, all right? The labor movement. I was a labor union organizer. I worked with Cesar Chavez way back when. I was an SEIU organizer. I've always been a big labor supporter. the Texas AFL-CIO wouldn't even consider endorsing our campaign because I wasn't a Democrat. So who do they endorse? Wendy Davis, a millionaire corporate lawyer who actually represented companies opposing labor unions. But because she was a Democrat, she gets the endorsement. Same thing with a lot of environmental groups. They don't, even though she's a fossil fuel candidate, supports fracking, they endorse her because she's got a
So then, Tom, I mean, I feel like this comes down to the democracy reform we were talking about before. People do feel like there's this duopoly in place where it's if they don't support the Democrat, they're making it easier on the Republican, who generally will have even worse policies on these things we care about. Do you think that there needs to be an approach to, go even further, like more state oriented and local, like even further down ballot? Because that's where so much of the democracy reform comes from. Like, I think my final question, I know I said that last one was my final question, but I have one more. Like, what do you think is the path for the Green Party to grow as a totality of a movement? Because I think they've been running a lot of candidates at the federal election cycle, and it's been a little bit harder because they're like outgunned in the sense of money. What do you think is the path forward for breaking through that duopoly so we can start addressing those things?
Well, I think one of the things that I understand, I mean, again, there's so much that needs to be changed. There is and again, 50 states, they have 50 different laws for ballot access.
Yeah.
Right. And for a lot of states, and I can't remember the exact, I think 30, it's over 30 states. The only way a third party can get on the ballot in that state is if they have a presidential candidate that gets over 5% or 3% of the vote. So that's one reason why Howie is running for the Green Party. His whole goal, he knows he's not going to win the presidency, but his whole goal is to get over that, whether it's 3% in some states or 4% or 5%, in order to allow the Green Party to have access so they can start running candidates as a third party in that state for governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, state house. So I think that's one of the reasons why he's running like that. I think here in Texas, they just passed a law 2 years ago, and this was the first year that gave the Green Party and Libertarian Party ballot access. So we now all have ballot access. Now, the problem is that what they said, but you're also going to have to pay a $3,500 filing fee. Well, that filing fee is what the Democrats and Republicans pay for because they have primaries. And the idea was those filing fees help cover the cost of the primaries. Well, Libertarians and Greens nominate by convention. So there's a couple of different lawsuits out there now, both at the federal level and at the state level, to tell the state, look, you can't require a filing fee if they don't run a primary. Now, how that's finally going to play out, I don't know. But we do have ballot access now.
Well, I'm thankful that you explained that to everyone out there, that there is a just cause for the top of the ticket, helping unlock the down ballot access. The floor is yours, Tom. I want to give you a chance to speak to those people out there. Can you let them know a little bit more about your district? Because we have a national audience here, so you're going to want to give them some information about who they should potentially be looking to contact. And, to those that are watching that are in your district, what are the final words you have for them as well?
Well, the 21st Congressional District is larger than the state of Connecticut. So it's a pretty large district. I mean, from my home here in the district, it takes me 2.5 hours driving northwest to the top of the district. Then I can cut across over there to Austin, Texas, and this is the southern part of the state capital, back down to San Antonio where I live. So, to drive the whole district, it takes me a good 5 hours to drive the whole district. Half the district is rural. The other half is urban. Like I said earlier, about 38% of the district is now Latino. And it has been a community that is historically been overlooked. And, it's very, my father and his sister were both born in Santiago, Chile. My wife is from Mexico. So I have a very strong connection to the Latino community. But it's an overlooked community. And again, I think that the issues that we're talking about affect them more than the Anglo community. Lack of health care, climate change, the need for universal basic income. These are the things that are very important, not just to all of us, but particularly to the Latino community. But anyway, again, John, I thank you for everything. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to talk to the audience. And let's talk again, maybe after the election. I have no idea who's going to win. I mean, it's a toss-up. I mean, my daughter lives in a small rural town outside of Austin, and she says it's just packed with people for Trump. A buddy of mine lives up in Blanco in a rural area, and there's a huge turnout of people voting in this rural community. But he said when he was talking to the poll workers that he knows, they're voting Trump. So even though there's this huge turnout of new voters, I don't think they're just coming out for Biden. I think they're also coming out for Trump. And I think there was a lot of hubris involved with Hillary Clinton's campaign. I'm going to win this thing. And I can see a little bit of that with the Biden campaign. Everybody thinks that, but I don't know. I mean, when people, have you ever been?
You want to lock in any predictions? This is coming out on election day, so
I would not be surprised to see the Democrats hold the House. I wouldn't be surprised to see him flip the Senate, but I think Trump could win too. So, because I can see that a lot, that people are going to vote for Trump, but on down ballot, they'll look at somebody a little bit different. I don't know. I have no idea who's going to win.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, it's going to be wild. Everyone out there, we can rely on polling data, but it all matters about what people actually show out. And I'm a little bit nervous in the sense of a lot more people are going to be voting by mail this year. And that might mean a lot of people might do it incorrectly and have their ballots get tossed out, which would be a shame. So, I have my fingers crossed. But yes, Tom, I'd love to have you come back, hopefully after the election. We will see how you have done at that point, as well as how the rest of the country is faring. But thank you so much for stopping by, man.
Not a problem. And like I said, it doesn't matter who wins the election. We're still going to have the issue of climate change, and they're going to have to deal with it.
Oh, that's so true. That is the major crisis of our time that we got to address. Everyone's been so panicked about COVID-19, but boy, this is going to cause even larger disruption. So, Tom, thank you so much.
I can tell you, I'm going to warn you here, with the climate change, there is going to be a glacier's going to melt somewhere, 100,000-year-old carcass is going to thaw out, and it's going to release pathogens more deadly than COVID. And people need to recognize that. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, I
think that's frankly already kind of happening. We've seen that already with the accelerated thawing of the ice caps already. And maybe that is somewhat responsible for COVID. It's creating a more hospitable environment for the spread of these diseases. So you're right. This touches all facets of life, and it's championing it.
4 years ago, I told people with a warming climate, it's going to make, especially here in Texas, it's going to be more attracted to insects. We're going to be having bugs coming up from Central and South America that we have the Zika virus. I mean, people need to recognize you can't keep cutting down forests, exposing bats that haven't seen a human being in 100,000 years. They're going to be flying out. Oh, we are doing everything possible to destroy this planet. But
yeah, you're so right. Well, Tom,
I'm preaching to the choir.
Well, I mean, it's so true. I mean, I'm luckily in the north, so it'll take a little bit longer for that type of stuff to reach me. But you're absolutely right. For districts like Texas is 21st, that's going to be on the horizon. So you got to take even faster action. But Tom, thank you so much for stopping by.
I appreciate it. You take care, John. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of The Hill of Roses. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you did, please let us know by subscribing to our channel, liking today's video, and sharing the video with your friends. Also, if you want to be notified, please make sure you hit the bell when you subscribe. Finally, if you want to find more of our network's content, please go to thehillofroses.com. With that being said, we love y'all for helping the movement grow, and we hope you're staying rosy out there.